I go by Michael Thompson, but most people call me Mike. Never Michael. There's always some overeager intern or clueless client who tries to get too familiar. So, Michael, how's that project timeline looking? They ask with fake enthusiasm. I usually respond with something technical about our agile sprints and velocity metrics that makes their eyes glaze over. I found it's the fastest way to end those conversations. I'm direct and have little patience for office politics or mind games. Being straightforward has served me well in my career as an IT project manager at a Fortune 500 tech company. I'm good at what I do, leading development teams across our offices nationwide. Outside of work, I enjoy photography and outdoor activities. While I'm not a fitness fanatic, I try to stay in decent shape for my age, hitting the gym a few times a week and going on weekend hikes when the weather permits. Photography used to be just a casual hobby, but over the past few years, I've built up quite a following on Instagram with my nature and landscape shots. Having over 10,000 followers still surprises me sometimes. I had to cut back on my weekend photo trips when the kids were younger, but that was a trade-off I gladly made. Nothing was more important than family time. I've been married to Sarah for 25 years. She works as an editor at a popular lifestyle media company, managing their digital content. Our two daughters are in college now. Emma is studying computer science at Brown University in Rhode Island, and her younger sister Sophie is at Boston University pursuing a degree in business analytics. Their tuition would have been a stretch for us, but they both earned impressive academic scholarships. We live in North Carolina's Research Triangle, a hub for tech companies and startups surrounded by prestigious universities. Living here has been great for both our careers. The tech scene is booming, and there's always something new happening. Sarah's work lets her stay connected to the latest digital media trends, while I get to work with cutting-edge technology. I was a bit disappointed when the girls chose colleges up north, but I understood their need to spread their wings. They're brilliant young women with strong values and sharp minds. I worry about them constantly, but I trust their judgment. They've never given me reason not to. Later that evening, with both girls away at college, I thought Sarah and I would finally have time to reconnect. I imagined coming home to evening walks together, trying new restaurants, maybe even taking some weekend trips to capture photos at sunrise. Almost like being newlyweds again. But reality had other plans. Looking back on that first year of empty nesting, I noticed Sarah changing. Her interests were shifting, becoming more focused on building her social media presence. Initially, I thought it was just her way of adapting to having more free time. But eventually, I realized it was something deeper, a fundamental shift in her priorities and values. Sarah has always been ambitious in the digital media world. To give her credit, she's built an impressive career. She started as a content writer and worked her way up to managing editor, always staying ahead of the latest trends. These days, she's heavily involved in their lifestyle content division, overseeing a team of writers and managing their social media strategy. She's even started building her own personal brand as a lifestyle influencer, though if you ask me, that market seems oversaturated. Character introduction. Throughout our marriage, Sarah has been part of various content creator groups. These are communities where digital media professionals share ideas, critique each other's work, and network. Some groups seem genuinely focused on professional development, while others felt more like echo chambers. Her current group, which included both content creators and traditional writers, was where things started falling apart. They would meet both virtually and in person, rotating between members' homes. During their in-person meetings at our house, I'd try to give them space. I attempted to join once, sharing some insights about tech trends, but Sarah and a few others made it clear my input wasn't welcome. I got the message and stopped trying. Sarah's group has about 10 regular members, a mix of content creators, writers, and social media managers. Some I genuinely respect, others not so much. Take Rachel, for instance. She creates well-researched historical content and actually adds value to the platform. Betty focuses on fantasy writing and maintains a modest but engaged following. Then there's Bill, who considers himself the group's social media guru. He can be pretentious, but he's mostly harmless. Then there's David. Something about him set off alarm bells from our first meeting. When I was introduced to him, he looked at me with barely concealed disdain and asked, "So, Michael, what exactly do you do in tech?" I glanced at Sarah, who subtly shook her head. I simply replied, "I manage software development teams." David's response was more smirk than smile. Growing suspicions. After that initial meeting, I kept my distance, but stayed observant. Working from home meant I often overheard their meetings from my home office. I couldn't help but notice how David and Sarah seemed to share private jokes and references that others didn't get. He would constantly praise her content ideas or reference conversations that seemed to happen outside the group. Something felt off, and I told Sarah as much. She dismissed my concerns, and I learned to stop bringing it up. But I made sure she knew where I stood. Scene: Content Creator Meeting. During one of their meetings in early March, I overheard their conversation shift to a concerning topic. They were discussing the lifestyle of successful content creators over their usual wine and snacks. "You know, all the top influencers have these secret lives," David was saying, his voice carrying through my open office door. "The drama, the controversies, that's what drives engagement." "That's right," someone chimed in. "Living on the edge gives you better content. Your followers can sense when you're playing it safe." David continued, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "The most successful creators all have these passionate side relationships. That's what really drives their creativity." Then Sarah's response hit me like a punch to the gut. "Oh, definitely. It's the thrill of it all, the excitement of having this whole secret world that your followers don't see. That's where the real content gold comes from." Some laughed while others stayed quiet. I tried to convince myself it was just industry talk, but I kept listening. "Maybe we should all have a wild weekend sometime and create some viral content," Bill joked, though his tone made it hard to tell if he was entirely kidding. "Great content comes from authenticity and genuine connections, not manufacturing drama," Betty responded firmly. I'd always appreciated her straightforward approach. Then David spoke again. "Anyone planning to attend the Digital Creator Summit in Illinois this summer?" "I already submitted my application," Sarah replied, and this was the first I'd heard of it. 6 weeks of intensive workshops and networking. It could be game-changing for my personal brand. David jumped in immediately. "Your content has evolved so much this year. They'd be crazy not to accept you. I've applied too, though I'm not as confident about my chances." My bias detector was going haywire. David's false modesty was transparent, but at this point, I still trusted my wife completely. When you've been married as long as we have, trust isn't a choice. It's your default setting. Your spouse is your partner, your other half. She's proven herself year after year, and all you want is for her to succeed and be happy. Or at least that's what you believe until everything falls apart. The first cracks. Over time, I tried to push that evening's conversation to the back of my mind. Like I said, trust was my default setting. Some younger guys might not get that, but after 25 years of marriage, it becomes as natural as breathing. Then again, so does denial. Late April evening. I was finishing up some reports in my home office when I heard Sarah on her phone in the kitchen. Her words made me freeze in place. I can't wait. 6 whole weeks without any responsibilities. No content calendars. No daily posts. And no one waiting for me to come home. I held my breath and listened. It's going to be the most self-indulgent 6 weeks of my life. I deserve this break from everything. And so do you. My fingers stopped typing. None of this felt right. I pushed open my office door and stepped into the kitchen. Sarah startled visibly. Oh, got to run. Mike just came in, and I need to prep for tomorrow's video shoot. She hung up quickly. Who was that? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Just Rachel. We were talking about the summer schedule. I knew it wasn't Rachel. My tech background had taught me to trust data over words, and I had a feeling checking our phone records would tell a different story. After dinner, later that night, Sarah dropped her news during dinner. Mike, you won't believe what happened today. Her enthusiasm felt forced. Remember that Digital Creator Summit in Illinois I applied for? No, I said carefully. Come on, you never pay attention to my career stuff anymore. The truth was, I'd only heard about it through that overheard conversation a month ago. I don't recall you mentioning it, I replied honestly. Well, I did. It's this amazing 6-week program at the University of Illinois. They bring in top influencers and industry experts for workshops and networking sessions. It's going to be incredible for my personal brand. And I got accepted. I tried to be supportive. That's great, honey. We can probably manage the expenses. Maybe I could take some time off and join you. I'd love to learn more about your industry. Her expression shifted subtly. Oh, well, it's going to be really intensive. I won't have much free time for visitors. Warning bells were ringing in my head. I wouldn't need much attention. I could work remotely, maybe help with your content creation. She gave me a nervous smile. That's sweet, but let's see how it goes. I recognized deflection when I heard it. She was already planning to ensure I wouldn't come to Illinois. The confrontation. I get the feeling you don't want me there, I said directly. No, it's not that, Sarah protested. It's just, you're so focused on tech and algorithms. This is about creative content and emotional connections. Back off. I wanted to shout, but kept it internal. Instead, I said evenly, I'm not unintelligent, Sarah. I didn't mean that. It's just that you think in metrics and KPIs. Content creation is about authentic storytelling and emotional resonance. Right, I replied flatly, recognizing when I was being marginalized. Later that night, after Sarah went to bed, I logged into our phone carrier's account. One benefit of being the family tech support. I manage all our digital accounts. The call I'd interrupted wasn't from Rachel. It came from David's number. It's amazing how quickly 25 years of trust can crumble when you catch your wife in a lie and realize she's actively working to exclude you from her plans. Weeks passed, and Sarah became consumed with talk about the summit. Every time I brought up visiting, she'd find new ways to discourage me. Then she switched from deflection to manipulation. Mike, I've got amazing news, she announced one evening. I booked you and Chris a premium wilderness photography retreat in northern Canada for late June. The lighting conditions are supposed to be incredible for landscape shots. It was expensive, but I wanted to thank you for being so understanding about the summit. I felt guilty about being away, so I want you to have this amazing opportunity for your photography. My suspicions deepened. Thanks. That was thoughtful. Though honestly, I'd rather spend time with you. Mike, we've been through this. It wouldn't make sense. I'll be networking and creating content nonstop. I'd feel terrible neglecting you. I studied her face carefully, trying to read what I saw there. Was that condescension behind her concern? Thanks. Canada sounds great, I replied without enthusiasm, while mentally calculating my options. A surprise visit to Illinois was moving to the top of my list. The phone call. Well, you could at least pretend to be excited. Those photography retreat tickets were expensive, Sarah said with a hint of irritation. Yeah, sounds good, I replied flatly, before heading to my home office to process my thoughts. Our house is old, with one of those floor vents in the hallway that carries sound remarkably well. Sarah often takes her private calls in the hallway, probably thinking the noise from my mechanical keyboard drowns out her voice. It doesn't. I was reviewing some project documentation when I overheard her conversation. Yes, I gave him the photography retreat tickets. He's still hesitant. I keep telling him he wouldn't enjoy the summit. No, I can't just tell him not to come. I understand. And I want that too, but I need to stay married afterward. I just need him to give me space to focus on my brand for a few weeks. I've earned it. Yes, I want those weeks with you too. Okay, let's wait. I think he'll come around. Okay, baby, I miss you too. Create something amazing for me tonight. The call ended, and I felt my stomach turn. I'm not naive. I recognize infidelity when I hear it. Either Sarah was already having an affair or planning one. Even the most charitable interpretation would require a lot of explaining. It took me 20 minutes to collect my thoughts, but I knew I needed to become the kind of person I've always despised. A liar, at least temporarily, until I could figure out my next steps. Making plans. I called upstairs, forcing warmth into my voice. Sarah, I'm heading over to Chris's place to tell him about the photography retreat. That's great, honey. Have fun. Just like that, I was out the door. Visiting Chris was just an excuse, but as I drove, I realized I needed someone to confide in. And Chris had been my best friend since college. You're kidding me. Chris never sugar-coated anything. No way. Sarah wouldn't do that to you, Mike. Well, she's working pretty hard to keep me away from that summit. And she's definitely calling someone baby. And it's not me. At Chris's house. We sat in silence for a while. That's what you need from a friend sometimes. Just sitting together, sharing the weight of the moment. You need to talk to her about this, Mike. You can't spend the next couple months assuming the worst without knowing the truth. And what's she going to say? Want to bet when I check our phone records tonight, it wasn't Rachel she was talking to? It wasn't Rachel she called baby. And it wasn't Rachel she's plotting with. I'm not taking that bet. So what's your plan? I'll have an honest conversation with her. That's what you do after 25 years together. I'll tell her I love her, express how hurt I am that she doesn't want me at the summit, and directly ask what she's planning that she doesn't want me there for. Think she'll tell you the truth? No, but I'll tell her my truth, even if some of it hurts to hear. She'll know how much I love her. She'll understand that cheating would end us, and then she'll probably try to convince me I'm imagining things and should just go enjoy my photography retreat. I paused. By the way, I've got 2 tickets for a premium wilderness photography retreat in Canada in June, and one's for you. Sweet. Chris caught himself. I mean, I'm here for you, buddy. I had to laugh. I've always known where his loyalty lies. We talked and had a few beers over the next 3 hours before I headed home. The confrontation. After dinner, I asked Sarah to join me in the living room. I laid out everything that had been bothering me. Well, almost everything. I held back a couple of key details. Honey, I have serious concerns. You never mentioned the Digital Creator Summit until you'd already made plans to attend. I overheard discussions about how drama and secret relationships drive engagement. Discussions I didn't find amusing. You've been talking with David about your trip, but when I ask, you tell me it's someone else. You know how I feel about him. Then when you told me about being accepted, you immediately started pushing me away. I wanted to share in your excitement, but instead of considering that, you made plans to send me away without even discussing it. It feels like you're making sure I won't be around while you're in Illinois. I don't think you're being honest with me, and I'm starting to question if you've been faithful. Sarah's response. Mike, I would never do that to you. You're my husband. I can't believe you'd think something like that about me. Sarah's voice rose defensively. All I want is to focus on growing my personal brand. It really hurts that you don't trust me. I can't control what makes me suspicious or how I feel about it. You know, I love you. I've loved you since we first met, but I can't ignore what I'm seeing. This summit. Is this your way of taking a break from our marriage, Sarah? The following week. That was the end of our real conversation. What followed was a week of either shouting or silence from her. The silent treatment was her way of forcing me to back down, to make me submit. But it didn't work. If anything, it strengthened my suspicions. Eventually, I decided to let her think she'd won. If she was planning to cheat, I couldn't stop her. The phone conversation I'd overheard suggested it might have already happened. I thanked her for the photography retreat, though my mood remained noticeably down until the conversation moved on. Once she got what she wanted, she switched back to being the loving wife, reinforcing the behavior she wanted from me. It was like watching someone flip a switch, and it only made me more suspicious. I recognize manipulation when I'm experiencing it. Planning ahead. The Illinois Digital Creators Summit was about 500 miles away, and I didn't know anyone there. I asked a colleague who he consulted when he suspected his wife of cheating. His recommendation led me to a PI based in Illinois. The summit's university campus location worked to my advantage. While the PI's team couldn't attend the workshops, they could move freely around campus. Participants would use campus facilities, local restaurants, and stay in modern student apartments. The setup made surveillance relatively straightforward. Some of those students wandering around would actually be working for me, equipped with the latest surveillance tech. With our daughters staying at their universities for summer research programs, we were still empty nesters. I made a concentrated effort, planning date nights, cooking special dinners, attending local events together. Sarah seemed to enjoy it all, and I started to wonder if I was being paranoid. However, whenever I expressed my love for her, I sensed a dismissive, I know attitude. Slowly, the pieces came together. It wasn't that she had stopped loving me. She had taken me for granted. I was her safety net, reliable and familiar. She believed she could go away, seek excitement, take a break from our marriage, and I would be waiting when she returned. The departure. Reality crystallized the day she left. We stood by the door as her Uber to the airport arrived. I held her tight and pleaded, "Please don't do anything that could break us." She gave me an irritated look. "I'm tired of your trust issues. When I get back, we need to have a serious talk about this." She gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, grabbed her bags, and walked to the car without looking back. In that moment, I knew my marriage was ending. After 25 years and 2 grown daughters, it was fading away without much drama. The evidence. The PI proved efficient. According to his reports, they didn't try to hide anything since they were away from home. Sarah must have removed her wedding rings on the plane because they were gone when she arrived. She openly claimed to be recently divorced, and from day one, she and David became inseparable. They were constantly together, sharing kisses, holding hands, acting like teenagers in love. My PI cleverly placed a small camera in the apartment building hallway. Though Sarah and David each had their own assigned rooms, they only used one. Sometimes hers, sometimes his, but they spent every night together. I already knew what was happening in those shared rooms, but my PI team went above and beyond to confirm it. One evening before dark, Sarah and David retired early. 2 operatives, posing as students, sat in the hallway and slipped a tiny fisheye camera under the door. They captured 20 minutes of David in action. The video quality was surprisingly clear, and when he finished, it was obvious he hadn't used protection. That was my breaking point. My decision was made. I was done with this marriage. Everything else the team uncovered just reinforced my resolve. Taking action. The pie kept me updated regularly, but after that first week, her fate was sealed, and my choice was clear. From the early days of her summit, I used my time to set my plan in motion. I would become a ghost, vanishing completely. When she returned, I would be gone with no chance of return. No lies, no ultimatums, no long talks or explanations or attempts to fix things. Just divorce. The marriage was over. Love doesn't die quickly, but what's love without trust? There's no future with a cheating wife. Some might say my solution was weak. They might argue she deserves physical punishment, complete humiliation, and financial ruin. But ultimately, the law would prevent any of that, and I had no intention of ruining my own life seeking such extreme revenge on my unfaithful wife and her lover. My revenge would be taking away the one thing she always counted on, the steady presence that supported her, encouraged her, lifted her up, and motivated her. I was taking myself away. David wasn't a worthy catch. He couldn't provide what she needed long term. Where would a divorced 50-year-old woman find love and emotional stability? I didn't care. She wouldn't be my concern anymore. The digital trail. Every few days, my pie would send me more pictures, more videos, more evidence of betrayal by the person who had promised me loyalty above all else. The reports were hard to read, and the photos and videos were even harder to watch. The audio recordings were the worst, especially when they discussed me. He keeps texting me about his photography projects and how amazing the lighting is up there. He thanks me almost every day, she said with a laugh, her voice clear in the recording. He's clueless, David joined in. Keep him focused on his Instagram followers, and you're free to do what you want. When I get back, I'm going to confront him about his accusations. How dare he question my commitment to our brand? But you're taking a break from the marriage, right, beautiful? Or is that some other content creator sharing my bed every night? She actually giggled at that. He might be onto something, but I won't tolerate his suspicions. I'm a digital media professional, and he's holding me back with his technical mindset, his data analysis, and his KPI obsession. What does he understand about authentic content creation? Making moves. I considered various revenge scenarios, but realized none would satisfy me as long as my life remained connected to hers. Only one choice made sense, so I began methodically disconnecting myself from her life. I had an honest conversation with my boss, explaining everything. He understood, having gone through something similar recently. He arranged a transfer to our company's office in Portland, Maine. The idea appealed to me. I knew the team there. They were skilled professionals, and I enjoyed their company. Both the city and state seemed like perfect places for landscape photography. I scheduled movers to transport half our furniture and all my personal belongings north. I made sure my car was ready for the long drive. Then I consulted with a lawyer to initiate divorce proceedings. As for finances, Sarah had her own insurance and retirement accounts. I removed her from all my assets and made our daughters the beneficiaries. I signed over the house to her in exchange for no alimony. She could keep her car, but needed to handle her own insurance. I planned to deal with the bank accounts and credit cards closer to the end, keeping my intentions quiet. Building resolve. From that point on, I focused on strengthening my resolve. I would try to call her, asking about the summit and telling her I loved her. I figured hearing her lies would reinforce that I was doing the right thing. She didn't disappoint. In less than 2 minutes, she would enthusiastically answer, declare her love, and rush off to another workshop session. My pi later informed me that David was right beside her during these calls, exchanging knowing looks and mocking gestures, which only confirmed my decision. She treated it all like a joke, proving I was on the right path. After that, I switched to text messages instead of calls, not trusting myself to keep my emotions in check over the phone. I'd update her about successful photography shoots at the retreat, but in reality, Chris and his wife were enjoying those Canadian landscapes. They had a fantastic time. Chris married well. I did visit them to say goodbye before I left, and they promised to come see me in Maine. The final days. As her 6-week summit drew to a close, I completed my final tasks. A realtor friend gave me a for sale sign that I placed in the front yard. I couldn't actually sell the house without her consent, especially since I had already transferred ownership to her, but she didn't know that detail. When she returned home, it would be the first thing she'd see. I changed the locks on the house to make it feel less like home, selected certain photos from her summit, including explicit stills from the video taken under David's door, and compiled a copy of the PI's report. I left all of this on the dining room table so she would know her actions had been discovered. Most of my belongings had already been moved by the movers, who would store them until I was settled. I only carried 2 suitcases, my laptop bag, and my camera equipment. My professional camera gear was too precious to trust to anyone else. David might have my wife, but my passion for photography remained mine alone. The final message. My original plan was to leave the next morning, knowing she wouldn't return until later that night. That way, I'd be long gone when she arrived. But I changed my mind the night before. I wanted her to feel the impact immediately, left only to wait and worry. I sent her an email containing 3 carefully chosen photos of her and David, along with the message. I filed for divorce. I selected one photo of them being intimate on a campus bench, clearly showing she wasn't wearing her wedding rings. The second captured them entering his apartment hand in hand. The third was a screenshot from the apartment surveillance, showing her face clearly. I knew these images would ruin their final romantic night as they frantically searched for cameras that were already removed. Then I turned off my phone. Leaving home. Leaving our family home of countless years was simultaneously the most painful, uncertain, and liberating moment of my life. In essence, my wife was gone. I didn't understand exactly when or why, but it felt like a death. Even if I hadn't caused it myself, the woman who looked like my wife was a stranger to me now, someone I didn't recognize and didn't want to know again. I was starting fresh, facing an unknown path. Amid the profound sense of loss, there was an odd feeling of freedom. The weight of deception, betrayal, and condescension lifted from my shoulders, if only temporarily. The only cost was that half of my life was now inaccessible. The journey begins. Though it was late, my mind was racing, so I drove about 100 miles up the quiet highway until I found a local hotel. I wasn't looking for a chain. I wanted an authentic local breakfast spot. Something real. I found it and savored what might be my last plate of southern grits for a while. Over those grits, my thoughts shifted, and I began reconsidering my drive to Maine. This was the start of my new life, and I had a long journey ahead. I could rush straight to Maine, running from my problems, but I had 2 weeks before work started. Why hurry? I needed time to process her betrayal, come to terms with everything, and leave the past behind. I decided to take it slow, appreciating the scenery as I headed north, and connecting with each state and its people as I passed through. This week would be my transition from old life to new. I planned to feed my senses, including my camera lens, cleansing myself of the ugliness and mistakes of my past, and preparing for a fresh start. I spent the rest of that day wandering around Williamsburg among the summer tourists, capturing the work of skilled artisans and craftsmen with my camera. Despite not having reservations, I found a place to stay. It wasn't until after a light dinner and settling in for the night that my thoughts returned to my failed marriage. Around that time, she would be returning home. I wondered how she'd react to seeing the for sale sign and finding her keys didn't work. The next day, I headed north, taking back roads toward Annapolis, Maryland's capital. I drove through small towns and historic plantations along Virginia's ancestral rivers, the York, Rappahannock, and Potomac, which flow into the Chesapeake Bay. Each scene I photographed felt like stepping further from my old life. There was one road ahead, leading to my future, and I would follow that winding path as it guided me away from betrayal and toward a new chapter. Hotel in Annapolis. I sat in my downtown Annapolis hotel room and finally turned on my cell phone. As expected, it was flooded with missed calls, emails, and text messages, mostly from Sarah with a few from friends. I read and listened to all of them, even though it was painful. It needed to be done. Sarah's initial messages tried to convince me things weren't what they seemed. Those were the ones she sent from Illinois before getting home to find the rest of the photos and the PI's report. Meanwhile, friends were letting me know that Sarah was reaching out to everyone trying to find me. She was looking in all the wrong places. Chris and his wife knew, but I'd kept everyone else in the dark intentionally. I would tell them once I was settled. I knew I couldn't stay a ghost forever. The 2 calls that concerned me were from my daughters. Sarah had contacted them trying to locate me. I hadn't told them about my decision to leave their mother. I wanted to do it face to face. But I couldn't let them worry, so I called my daughters and calmly explained everything. They were upset and struggled to believe their mom could do this, so I sent them the same photos I'd sent Sarah the night I left, along with the PI's report. After that, they promised not to tell their mother about my movements. There was one more missed call. My lawyer confirming that Sarah had been officially served divorce papers. Now she knew I meant business. He also mentioned that David's wife had received a complete set of photos, videos, and audio recordings from his 6-week summit. That was karma taking care of David. The journey north. On my 3rd day of travel, I drove through northern Maryland and excitedly reached New Jersey. Well, not exactly. I crossed into New Jersey, but didn't stop until Connecticut. Once there, I spent a few hours exploring historic coastal towns. I had no specific goal, but the architecture was so different from North Carolina that it reinforced the feeling of being somewhere new, both physically and emotionally. Don't tell Homeland Security, but I spent an hour in Groton trying to photograph as many submarines as I could spot. Those black vessels are quite stealthy. While looking out at the water, I thought about how they cut holes in submarine hulls to refuel the nuclear reactors, then weld them back together. Was that a metaphor for my situation? Could Sarah's betrayal, which had torn a hole in my heart, be the first step in re-energizing my life? Could I heal myself once I started my new journey? Meeting Emma. As I woke up the next day, I knew it would be the hardest day yet. After a hearty breakfast of eggs, bacon, toast, and strong black coffee, I prepared myself for a difficult conversation with my eldest daughter, Emma, at Brown. The drive wasn't long, and I arrived at her dorm by late morning. We both pretended to be cheerful for an hour or 2 while she showed me around campus and introduced me to her friends in the computer science program. They were exactly the kind of young people I'd hoped she'd surround herself with, bright, supportive, and genuinely interested in their field. Before leaving, I pulled her roommate aside and told her Emma was going to have a rough day. I asked her to look after my daughter. "Of course, Mr. Thompson. She told us last night. We're all here for her," she replied. My daughter had chosen her friends well. Emma and I spent hours in her dorm room talking. I shared photos and played audio recordings that I never thought I'd have to share with one of my children. Her emotions swung between sadness and anger. I can't believe Mom would do this. Is she even the same person who raised us? What kind of person has she turned into? I had to step in, despite understanding her feelings. Emma, whatever she's done, she's still your mother. And remember, it's me she's betrayed, not you. Sorry, Dad, but she shattered our whole family. This absolutely affects me too. I couldn't argue with that. We talked through the afternoon, and I explained my plans to her. Later, I gathered her friends, and we went out for dinner at the best place in town, or at least the best within my budget. Everyone seemed to appreciate a break from dining hall food. I shared stories about my own college days, which gave them a new appreciation for their current meal plans. The next morning, I stayed at a local hotel that night, had breakfast with Emma, shared a tearful hug, and headed to Boston to repeat the process. Emma must have warned Sophie because her reaction was more composed than her sister's. There was still disappointment and anger, but less surprise. She asked to see the evidence, and I showed her. By coincidence, her mother called while we were talking. I gave Sophie the universal "I'm not here" sign, head shake, frantic gestures, and throat-cutting motion. She understood. Sophie was always the more level-headed one. The confrontation call. Then Sophie did something I never expected to witness. She answered her mother's call on speaker. "Dad called last night, didn't he? Is it true you've become someone who cheats on her husband and lies about it, spending time with multiple partners while building your personal brand?" I was taken aback. I wanted to scold her for speaking to her mother that way, but I couldn't deny the truth in her words. "You heard me, Mom. You spent 6 weeks being involved with someone else while Dad was alone at home. Was growing your social media presence worth losing your marriage over?" Wow, my data analyst daughter had quite the way with words. Mental note: never get on her bad side. Evening in Boston. There wasn't much more to discuss. Sophie told me her mother was mostly crying and trying to make excuses, but my daughter wasn't buying any of it. Later, I took Sophie and her friends to a Thai restaurant called the Elephant Walk near campus. Like her sister, Sophie had chosen her friends wisely, and dinner was a pleasant distraction. Walking back to campus, one of her friends said, "Mr. Thompson, Sophie told us what you're going through. She was really upset last night, but we supported her. Maybe you could visit again, and we'll treat you to the dining hall." That got everyone laughing. I mean, well, actually, maybe we can find somewhere better. More giggles, and we laughed all the way back to her dorm. The next morning, I found a hotel for the night, had breakfast with Sophie in the morning, and on the 7th day of my journey, continued north. Leaving Boston, I was just 2 hours from Portland. My focus had shifted from my soon-to-be ex-wife to my daughters. They were growing into strong, principled young women, and I couldn't be prouder. I realized they would handle the upcoming divorce better than I'd expected. The challenge today was leaving these two amazing young women behind, not knowing when I'd see them next. As it turned out, my worries were unnecessary. I wasn't ready to face starting my new life just yet. So when I reached Portsmouth, New Hampshire, I turned west and drove toward the White Mountains and the Presidential Range. Mount Washington. I took the cog railway up to Mount Washington's summit. Standing there, looking across to the smaller peaks of the White Mountains, surveying the green pine forests below, feeling the cold Arctic winds that seemed out of place in early August, I finally felt rebirth happening within me. I was alone, but finally standing tall. A transformation had occurred, leaving behind the pain and regret of my old life. And now I was ready to embrace whatever came next. I stood on higher ground, prepared to start a new journey. Everything I wanted lay ahead. Arriving in Portland, The next morning, I ordered pancakes topped with real maple syrup. I was in maple syrup country now, and would be for years to come. Feeling refreshed and eager, I drove to Portland, arriving mid-afternoon. I decided to check in with my new boss to let them know I'd made it. I already knew about half the office staff, and their welcome was warm. It felt good. They were the first uncomplicated, friendly faces I'd seen in a week. My new boss Henry gathered everyone for introductions. I got a quick tour of the office, but not before everyone agreed where we'd all go for dinner. I expected a downtown restaurant, but we ended up at Henry's house, grilling steaks and enjoying all the fixings. I knew I should have had lobster in Maine, but there was no rush for that. This was about rejoining society while enjoying some exceptionally good steaks and really outstanding local beer. They asked about my story. What was a tech guy from the South doing uprooting his life and moving to Maine at this stage? So I told them. I left out the graphic details, but shared enough for them to understand. I ended with a small request. I might get a bit short-tempered in the next few weeks. It's not who I am, but I have a lot to process. If I act out, please call me on it and tell me to cool it. I could use some gentle pushback now and then. Unexpectedly, every woman there hugged me and gave me a peck on the cheek, while every man put an arm around my shoulder. "We're here for you, Mike." That's all they said, and all they needed to say. Night in Portland. Later that night, in my hotel room, I turned on my phone again. Both daughters had sent supportive texts. They must have shared my number with their friends because I had about 8 or 10 additional messages from the young people who'd enjoyed our dinners, wanting me to know they'd be there for my daughters. Those kids are truly remarkable. Several friends were still reaching out, so I decided to connect with all of them and explain the situation so they'd stop worrying. I didn't reveal my location. That would come later. I simply told them why I'd left. While they were initially skeptical, I sent them the same 3 photos I'd sent Sarah and mentioned I had more evidence if they needed convincing. I thought about it, but honestly couldn't find a single reason to shield her from her own choices. I'd tried that, and it hadn't worked, so let the truth come out. Eventually, I got messages of love and support from each of them, and I assured them I'd stay in touch. It was becoming increasingly clear that my ideas of becoming a ghost were just wishful thinking. Too many people cared about me, and that's definitely a good thing. The final conversation. I went through Sarah's remaining text messages and listened to her missed calls. Finally, she admitted everything, though her confession came mixed with strange bursts of anger. She managed to blame me one way or another for her actions and everything that had happened. I texted her saying I'd call around noon the next day. It had to happen eventually. The conversation was far from satisfying. She swung between blame, guilt, and denial. She was sorry David had influenced her. I was suffocating her creative growth. It was my fault because I worked too much. She even tried to claim nothing serious happened between them. They were just networking. I almost laughed when she tried to convince me she was only seeking creative inspiration. She went so far as to accuse me of turning our daughters against her, as if her own actions hadn't accomplished that without any help from me. When she finally fell silent, I laid it out simply. She had plotted with David to betray me, resisted my attempts to save our relationship, carried out the betrayal, and now she was facing the consequences. I no longer cared about the WHS. When I hung up, she was still crying and pleading her case. I was done with her. There was no going back. I knew too much. New beginnings. I found a simple but comfortable 2-bedroom apartment in an older building, walking distance from the office. I thought I'd use the exercise from walking and initially saw it as temporary, but my perspective quickly changed. Living simply in town, avoiding the responsibilities of house ownership, and having a small coastal cottage for weekends seemed like a good plan. Then I thought, why stop at a cottage? I could get a boat, keep it in the harbor, and make that my weekend retreat for photography. By the time I sorted all this out, early fall had arrived. I thought I'd lead a solitary life, but it hasn't worked out that way. I actually spend more time with my daughters now than when I lived in Raleigh. They come up for a weekend every month, often bringing friends. During those 36 hours, my apartment buzzes with activity, and I usually treat them to dinner. Once they're gone, I appreciate the quiet, though I miss them as soon as they leave. Surprisingly, several of my friends have visited, and the rest plan to come when the weather improves. I'm living alone, but I don't feel lonely. I've made new friends at work and through my photography. The sailing community is welcoming and inclusive, and I've met interesting women. However, I'm staying respectful and well-behaved until the divorce is final. The aftermath. Though the divorce will be official soon, Sarah still reaches out. She never truly apologizes, preferring to minimize everything. All she says is everyone does it. It doesn't mean anything, but it does. The intimacy matters, and the deception and manipulation matter even more. I thought about explaining this to her, but people change, and I no longer see the point. Truthfully, my life isn't completely separate from hers. With 2 daughters and many mutual friends, total detachment is impossible. However, with 600 miles between us, I no longer live with the daily pain of rejection and betrayal. She used to be the center of my life until I was no longer in hers. Now I'm creating my own path and building my own future. Epilogue. Several good things have come from this situation. First, I genuinely enjoy living here. I'm experiencing my first Maine winter, which is quite a shock. But if others can handle it, so can I. The early darkness actually makes indoor gatherings feel cozier and brighter. I've started looking at boats and found a marina not far from town. So I'm looking forward to spring when I can work on my photography from the water. The local restaurants are good, the microbreweries are excellent, and the people are genuine. There's a variety of music, new dances to learn, and I'm still discovering surprises. I think life will turn out well for me after all. Oh, and as a footnote, David's wife turned out to be as traditional as I am. She kicked him out and divorced him. What's even better, both Sarah and David's follower counts have been dropping steadily since the story got out.